Okay, so first things first, what is sous vide cooking? You've probably encountered lots of other gadgets, an Instant Pot, an air fryer, lots of those things, where what it does is immediately clear. With sous vide cooking, it's not immediately clear. First of all, to us English speakers, it's a French term, which doesn't help. We don't know the translation of that term, and explaining it does take a little bit more work. So let's dive into that. First things first, let's talk about pronunciation. Don't be ashamed if you're not sure how to pronounce it, or if you've already been pronouncing it wrong. It's pronounced sous, like moo, vide. So you don't say the second S in sous, and you do say V-I-D-E, but it's just pronounced vide. So that's how you pronounce it. So sous vide in French literally translates to under vacuum. So for centuries now, people have been experimenting with different elements of the sous vide cooking process, but it wasn't until the 70s in France when it was put all together. So people, have been cooking low and slow for a really long time. People have been doing some kind of pressure cooking for a really long time, but sous vide combines all of those things. So let's just get really basic with it. With sous vide cooking, you take your food, you put it in some kind of container like a jar or a bag, you seal that container, and then you place that contained food into a temperature-controlled water bath, and you let it sit for longer than you would normally cook that food. So let's recap that really quick. Food in bag or jar or bag in water bath, leave it there for a while. That is essentially sous vide cooking. My favorite way to explain it in more of like a real life scenario is to think of sous vide like a mini hot tub. So the Immersion Circulator is what makes it a hot tub instead of a little pool. So we use this device, it's called Immersion Circulator. There's other types of sous vide machines, but we'll talk about that later. But we use this device to circulate the water and keep it at a precise temperature for as long as we want. So just to give you some insight into how an Immersion Circulator works, once you press start, it pulls water into the machine where there are heated coils. Those coils are, again, set to the specific temperature that you tell it to. Right now I've got this guy going at just over 130 degrees. So it pulls the water in and then pushes it back out. And so it's passing through those coils at all time. And that circulating process is really important for the precision element of this cooking method. That's why I am skeptical of gadgets like the Instant Pot all-in-one sous vide pressure cooker, blah, blah, blah. But again, we'll get to that later. Okay, so let's dive into why is sous vide cooking better than traditional cooking methods or other cooking methods that you're more familiar with? Why is this what you want to be doing? It sounds kind of weird. So we are going to talk about this in the context of steak. Steak is really what sous vide cooking is well known for, and there's a good reason for it. So when you go to a restaurant and the server says, how do you want your steak cooked? And you respond with something like medium rare, or at least I hope you do. What that is referring to is literally the temperature of the inside of the steak. So doneness equals temperature. So what that means in practice is the center of a rare steak is literally colder than the center of a well-done steak. So using your Immersion Circulator, you can keep a water bath at the exact temperature you want your steak to be cooked. I love a medium rare steak. This means I'm usually cooking at 129, 130 degrees. So when I place a vacuum sealed steak in a water bath like this one here, the steak itself never has the opportunity to get hotter than whatever I've set the water bath for. So in this case, 130 degrees, because its entire cooking environment is that temperature. So let's think about this in your oven. If you want to cook something in your oven, let's say a chicken breast, you would set the oven to something like 400 degrees. And then you put the chicken breast in the oven and you hope that you possibly pull out that chicken breast at just the moment it's done, before it's overdone, not while it's underdone, and just that perfect little window. Since the cooking environment of the oven is a greater temperature than what you want your chicken breast to reach, the inside of your chicken breast to reach, there's always an opportunity for you to overcook it. So the nice thing is with something like a chicken breast, it's a little more forgiving. But if you do that to that really expensive piece of salmon that you were able to get, or let's say you oven cook a steak, that is devastating, both to your wallet and your self-esteem. The great thing about sous vide is I could literally cook a steak for days and I wouldn't technically overcook it. I would, make the temperature or the texture a little bit funky, but again, that's for later. But the thing about this is you have a nice long window at which your steak is going to be perfectly cooked, and you can pull it out at any time during that window, whereas that really short window of other cooking methods. Again, because the entire cooking environment, which is the water, is only that temperature that you want the interior of your steak to reach. This same logic extends to any other foods that are kind of particular when you want to cook them. So for example, one of my favorite things to cook is a cheesecake. And when you cook a cheesecake in the oven, you hope the top doesn't crack. You hope that the center's not too wiggly and underdone. You're hoping for all of these magical things to come together and for you to actually nail it. When you're cooking, again, in the water bath, the temperature of the water bath is the exact temperature you want the cheesecake to be all the way through, so you know it's going to be perfect every single time. So the trade-off with this is that it does take longer to cook your food. So the benefit of a really hot cooking environment like an oven is it's going to increase the temperature more rapidly. Our lower cooking environment is going to take a little bit longer. So steak takes about an hour to cook, but to me, it's worth it. And so my kind of cooking process for anything is I get the steak going first, and then I start working on all my sides. I do the dishes as I go, all that good stuff. And then the steak is done whenever I say it's done. So after that hour or so mark, that time is going to differ with different things that we cook. But again, we'll talk about that more later. After that hour mark, anytime up to 4 hours, I can choose to pull the steak out of the water bath. So it gives me as much flexibility as I want, which is really nice, especially when you've got like a group of people coming over. But this piece of food that you're used to babysitting, like a steak, for example, if you are grilling a steak, that is your only job. That is the main thing you are focused on, because if you overcook it, you ruin the meal. That is not the case anymore with sous vide cooking. Once I get it in the water bath, I don't think about it again until it's time to sear. So let's talk about some other benefits of sous vide cooking. One, you can get cheaper cuts of meat, which are usually tougher. That's why they're cheaper. And you can cook them for longer to tenderize them without overcooking them, which is incredible. So for example, I today am cooking the cheapest cut of steak I could get at Costco, which is a top sirloin, which is still a pretty good cut. But because I can use time to kind of tenderize it, it's going to taste like a really expensive cut of steak. For all of our squeamish people out there, I'm looking at you, father-in-law, we can also cook the steak until it's pasteurized. So 130 degrees is kind of our magical cooking number here. If I am ever cooking longer than 3 hours, I always cook at hotter than 130 degrees to make sure I'm killing bacteria. So almost all food bacteria is killed at 130 degrees. So if you cook your food at 130 degrees for at least 10 minutes, meaning the food itself is at 130 degrees, so that's going to be past that hour mark or so. For just about 10 minutes or so, you will have killed all of the germs in it. So this is really great. Of course, consult with your doctor. I'm not doling out medical advice here, but this is really great. For example, if you're pregnant, if you're squeamish, something like that, you can rest assured knowing that all that bacteria is killed. I've linked to an article from Cooks Illustrated where they dive into this topic a little bit deeper if you're curious. Another great benefit is when you're cooking for a crowd. So you can get all of your steaks ready to go in your water bath, and then you just sear to serve. So again, you're not babysitting this super particular thing. It's also great for things like a prime rib. It's great for any kind of rib roast, really. Things like brisket, tons of big items that you typically only serve at special occasions. You can prep ahead of time with sous vide cooking and then just finish it off before serving to your company. Okay, so we've mostly been talking about protein here, but sous vide is amazing for egg bites, which I'm sure you've heard about through Starbucks by now. The dreamiest desserts you'll ever have. I use it for quick pickling all the time. I love to do a good liquor infusion with this and so much more, and we are going to cover that throughout this guide.